All right, let's start the show. Um, I've watched myself on the webcast. I start every week with very, very professional. Today, I am very, very happy to have back with us. Mark Barabak is back. I just like to say Mark Barabak is back. This is Mark Barabak right here. He is a reporter for the LA Times. Those of you who read the LA Times, I'm sure have read his work. He's been covering the Obama campaign, was in Texas recently with Obama, where he lost and yet won. What a great country is America. He's been with the LA Times 11 years. He was with the Chronicle before that. A wonderful, wonderful human being. Please welcome, I had to say it, Mark Barabak.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you all for coming, for having me back. As the professor said, I've done this before. I didn't come with any sort of prepared remarks, any sort of notes, any sort of anything. He asked me to tell some stories and then answer questions. But what I'd like to do is answer questions which inevitably lead to stories. Just a small point of clarification, as they say. I was most recently with Senator Obama. I've been covering the whole campaign. I've been covering this campaign. I actually made my first trip related to covering the 2008 presidential campaign in August of 2007. August of 2005, which gives you an idea how long this has been going on. I went to Iowa with a guy named Evan Bayh, who you may or may not have heard of, the senator from Indiana who was going to run and then didn't do so. Just by way of the briefest sort of bio background, I've been a reporter for almost 30 years. I've spent most of that time covering politics. This is actually my 8th presidential campaign. So I can talk about this campaign. I can talk about campaigns prior. I gather this is a poli-sci class. I don't know how much time you're spending on presidential politics versus others. But like I said, I'll answer any questions to the best of my ability, as they say. The one thing I cannot answer, and I will not answer because I cannot answer, is who's going to win in November. We can talk about sort of the lay of the land and how it looks. I can't tell you who's going to win the Democratic nomination because I don't know. The one thing that's made this campaign interesting and humbling both is that every time we seem to think we know what's going to happen, it doesn't. On the Republican side, if you want to go back when John McCain was the front runner, he was the clear-cut guy to beat. He stumbled. He was dead. It was over. People writing his obituaries figuratively and in the political sense, literally. No hope. He came back. He's obviously the nominee. Everyone thought, well, of course, the Republicans are going to be fighting to the death. They can't run any one candidate. No one likes any of these guys who are running, and the Democrats are going to wrap it up very quickly. Probably Hillary Clinton will be the nominee by, maybe January 8th, or if it's really pushing it, February 5th, and then the Republicans would fight all the way to their conventions. Well, obviously, we were wrong about that. Hillary Clinton, as I said, was the prohibitive front runner. Everyone took it for granted she was going to win for sure, wrap it up really, really quickly. That didn't happen. We all thought that after she lost Iowa, finished third in Iowa, she'd lose in New Hampshire. Even her people, that shows you how wrong everyone is. Even her strategists, even the people in the Clinton campaign that day were privately saying we're going to lose. Well, she didn't. She won New Hampshire. So we figured it would go on. It would be wrapped up on Super Tuesday. That didn't happen. So as I said, a lot of uncertainty. It keeps it interesting. It keeps it humbling. And for those reasons, I will not try and tell you anything definitive, but I'll give you my best approximation of what I think is going on out there. So no one ever wants to ask the first question, so I will let the professor ask the first question. Why what? Oh, why? The question is, how is the Obama campaign different than any I've ever seen before? It's different just in terms of just the amazing crowds he's been drawing, and I'm still trying to get my mind around Ohio and what happened there, because as was mentioned, I spent about a week with him, starting in Ohio and then going on to Texas, and the thing that's different about the Obama campaign is truly just drawing these unbelievable audiences, 13,000, 17,000, 15,000. We were in and I'm not using the royal we, I use the we in the sense of the traveling press corps. So when I say we, like I said, I'm not using it in the royal sense of the word. But we were in San Antonio, and I was filing an insert to another reporter's story making mention of a crowd of about 8,000. And I got an email back from an editor in Washington who was handling the insert and said, wow, 8,000 people, that's a lot. And I emailed back, actually, no, that's not a lot. That's the smallest crowd we've seen all week. And it was. I'm trying to figure out why it is he's drawing these incredible crowds and he lost so badly in Ohio. And I've done some reporting, not a lot on it, but my supposition is that maybe a lot of the people who are voting for Hillary Clinton are not the kind of people who show up at rallies. I don't want to sound like I'm reading off a script for her or from one of her ads, but they may be the people who are working the 2 jobs in the night shift and don't have time to go to political rallies in the afternoon or the evening. But the thing that is amazing about the Obama campaign has been the crowds, the energy, the money he raised. I mean, phenomenal amounts of money, just unbelievable amounts of money. $55 million in 1 month, which was February. I've never seen anything like it in terms of the outpouring. A lot of energy, Republicans coming over. I did a story on they call themselves Obamacans, people who are Republican who have no reason in the world ideologically to support Barack Obama, whose views on a lot of things are antithetical to what Republicans, well, what generally is the Republican philosophy. So in sum, there's just been a tremendous outpouring of interest, of enthusiasm, of energy surrounding Obama. But the interesting thing about the campaign has been that every time it looks like he's ready to wrap it up, close the deal, use whatever cliche you want, he doesn't do it. Clinton comes back. She's been incredibly, incredibly resilient. And now is in a position, as I'm sure all of you know, where it looks like the race is going to be decided by the quote-unquote so-called superdelegates, as opposed to the ones who are elected. And this is something, I mean, this is literally something we've never seen because superdelegates haven't only been around since '82. But if it were to go to a brokered convention, quote unquote, it'd be the first time in over 50 years. So it's been an amazing year, an amazing political year. If you're at all interested in politics, it's really been one sort of a campaign of a lifetime. Yes, way far in the back is a question. Yeah, I'll sum it up. Basically, the question is, has the media, which seemed to a lot of people to have been defanged or have defanged itself during the Bush years, grown some more spine and been more aggressive? I think that there has been, I'm always, I do these sorts of things fairly frequently, and there's always the question about the media, and I always start by saying, it's sort of hard to talk about the media. I mean, the media is everything from Fox News to Drudge Report to Field and Stream magazine to the LA Times and on and on. So it's hard to generalize about the media, any more than you can generalize about college students. All college students do this. All people who go to Berkeley do that. All of that said, I think there has been a certain amount of, call it introspection or soul searching on the part of the media, particularly the Washington press corps, which a lot of people felt lacked a certain amount of skepticism early on in the Bush administration. Certainly lacked a certain amount of skepticism. It's been well documented. The New York Times, in particular, in the lead up to war with Iraq. So I think there has been some of that soul searching going on. The Clinton people will tell you that the media has not been aggressive enough going after Barack Obama. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the whole Saturday Night Live, several of them now, skits about the media and its supposed infatuation with Barack Obama. We can talk about that. I can tell you, having done this for a long time, as I said, every campaign always feels that you're being too tough on them and not tough enough on their opponents. So that's nothing really new. Do I think Obama has gotten a free ride? I guess the short answer is no, I don't. I don't. I can tell you, again, it's hard to stand here as a spokesman for the media. I can't talk about what every newspaper has done. I can tell you that I've written several stories early on that I know they didn't like talking about a more sizzle than steak, if you will. I did a story the second day of his announcement tour saying that he said a lot of very eloquent things that were nothing new that anyone, the Democrats had been saying for the past 30 years. He was just saying them more eloquently. So, we've written stories, I've written stories. We, in the sense the LA Times has written stories involving this Tony Rezko, an associate now on trial on corruption charges in Illinois. We've written about that. The New York Times did a very hard-hitting story about nuclear power. And I would point you toward an analysis the public editor of the New York Times did. I think it ran either last Sunday or 2 Sundays ago, where he went through and did a qualitative analysis of the coverage. And it's necessarily subjective. What is a negative story? What is a positive story? But he found that on the whole, there had been more critical stories of Obama that had run, particularly on the front page of the New York Times, about Obama than about Clinton. So, again, you do this for a number of years, and you have a number of these discussions over and over and over. And what I will say to campaigns, what I will say to consultants, sometimes it's like the course of a baseball season. There's 162 games. Team might win 100 games in a season. That means they're going to lose 62, and they're going to be great some days. They're going to be bad some days, and you can't really judge a team on one game any more than you can judge the news coverage one day. There are going to be articles that McCain's not going to like one day. There's going to be articles the next day that Obama's not going to like. So what I always say is you need to judge the coverage in its totality, from the beginning of the campaign to the end. Don't isolate it to a single story or a single day's coverage. And to go back to your original question, in the main, I think that for the most part, the coverage has been fair, and that Obama has not gotten an easier ride or a free pass. Yes. The question is, when is it appropriate for a candidate to address the media, to criticize the media and not cross the line? I guess my answer would be whenever you feel aggrieved. If a candidate feels that they've been treated unfairly, then they have every right in the world to make that criticism. And if they do so every single day about every single story, then people will pretty soon get a sense of basically that they whine a lot, I guess. So, I would say, people tend to, not appreciate the time, the effort, the care that most reporters put into their work. I can't tell you how many emails I get about, you moron, you idiot, you stupid, you this, you that, blah, 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 obscenities, questioning my parentage, my intelligence, my education, all that sort of stuff. And you know what? That is not half the feeling, the sentiments that I direct toward myself if I make a mistake. No one in the world feels worse than I do if I make a mistake. Nobody does. No one sets out to make a mistake. I don't know many people who set out, I don't know any people, professional reporters who work for newspapers doing what I do, who set out to write a slanted or an unfair piece. Do we make mistakes? Sure. Are we human? Yes. So, I always invite people. I invite people anytime anyone has any criticism, any campaign, any candidate, any person, give me a call, and talk about it. And in a reasonable, rational sort of fashion. So I don't have a problem, so to answer your question, if you got a problem, candidates should speak up. There's nothing wrong with that. What do I think about the New York Times piece about McCain? I will tell you exactly what I told. I happen to be friends with a very high up editor of the New York Times, and we had dinner in Texas. And I'll tell you exactly what I said to him. I said I thought that there was a very interesting story to be told about McCain and ethical questions. I think bringing the allegation about him maybe having or not having had an affair with that woman was a distraction and sort of the proverbial red herring, in the sense that it drew all the attention away from what I thought was a very substantive article about ethics issues. So I don't run the New York Times. I didn't write the article, but I would not have gone there. I would not have gone there. Yeah. If it goes to a broker convention, would we see a repeat of 1968? The answer is probably, but I don't think it's going to come to that. I would be amazed. And again, huge asterisk next to everything, because every time we think something's not going to happen, it does. I would be very, very, very surprised if it went to a broker convention for the very reason that you talk about. I think there would be a lot of unhappy people. I think there would be a lot of outrage. I think there would be a lot of people who felt disenfranchised. I think it would hurt the Democrats this year the way it hurt them in 1968 and beyond. I think memories of 1968 hurt the Democratic Party for a long time afterward. So I think for all those reasons, I don't think they'll let it go to that point. Sure. In 1968, what happened? There were literally riots in the streets. It was later deemed to be a police riot, but there were riots in the streets of Chicago. A huge amount of anger and animosity, and basically people who tuned into the convention on their TV, saw images of rioting and clubbing and cars burning, and it became this symbol and this metaphor, a very powerful one of a Democratic Party that was out of control and condoning this sort of anarchy, and it cost the party. Hubert Humphrey lost a very, very close election to Richard Nixon. And as I said, for years and years, the Democrats were known as the party of, what was it, the three A's: acid, amnesty, and abortion. And that's how they ran against him. That's how Republicans ran against the Democrats. The three A's: the party of amnesty, acid, and abortion, all of which was promoted by those scenes from Chicago. So I think for that reason, the Democrats will do everything they can to avoid brokered convention. Yeah, this gentleman. What? Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to be in the position of advocating for or against John McCain or Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton for that matter. I think the examples you cite are all typical of a politician, which I know speaks to your point. How is he different? I think sort of the license he takes is no different than the license that McCain or Romney or Hillary or any other candidate who's running. As for what does he bring different, Obama would tell you that it's a willingness to work across the aisle and to listen to other parties' ideas. And then you could say, well, how are you going to get Republicans to support something like universal health care, which they are opposed to? How are you going to accomplish all these things? And now I'm speaking, these are sort of the talking points against Obama. You say that you want to bring together the parties. Well, where have you been in the last couple of years you've been in the Senate? I'll leave it to Obama and his people to defend his positions. The question is it fair to say Barack Obama is the least experienced candidate I've seen over all those years? I would, I'd have to think back. I would say probably no. I'm sure there are others with even less experience. I mean, you're talking about 8 campaigns. The least experienced, maybe the question would be the least experienced person to get as far as Barack Obama has, because there's a lot of goofballs and flakes who run who never make it as far as he does. That's sort of a judgment that I'm not comfortable making. Again, what the Obama people will tell you is there are different kinds of experience. There's political experience. There's experience in political office. You might recall, how many years was John Kennedy in the Senate? I think only a couple of years or so, although he'd been in the House before that, yeah. And Obama's people will tell you that there are different kinds of experience. Again, there's political experience in Washington. There's the work he did in community service in Chicago. I kind of leave that up to others to judge. Yeah, when Jerry Brown would have run, he would have run the first time. He ran in '76, right? He would have been governor for 2 years and Secretary of State for 4 years before that. So yeah, all the way in the back. Boy, I wish it would. The question is, with everyone getting it so wrong, she mentioned Chris Matthews and others sort of suggesting that it was over for Clinton. Will the press coverage change? And I think you need to sort of differentiate here between different kinds of media. In particular, I'm talking about sort of like the cable TV shows that have all these pundits and know-it-alls who are on TV. It always amazes me. I mean, look, I'm not a fan of these shows. I'll say that up front. But it always amazes me that the people who couldn't tell you 24 hours before what was going on, and often got it wrong, are on the set the very next day explaining exactly how they knew what was going to happen all along. It's sort of like it just doesn't figure. There should be more humility. But the fact is, I don't know. Doesn't make for very compelling TV. You know what I mean? Well, who's going to win? I don't know. Could be this, it could be that. It's not as exciting as someone who's going to sit there and yell and shout and argue. And I agree with you. I think a lot of the coverage is frankly terrible and stupid and a waste of time, which is why personally I don't watch a lot of it. I wish there would be more humility and people who just flat out said, I don't know, and don't try to predict. Do I think there's sexism? In general, no. But you mentioned Chris Matthews. I have to tell you, and I will confess, and I apologize if he watches your blog. I don't watch Chris Matthews. I don't watch Hardball, so I can't say. I know he's said a lot of stuff that people have been offended by. I don't think I've ever seen an episode of Hardball, so I couldn't tell you. Sorry. Yeah, in the back. What have I enjoyed most about following the Obama campaign? Well, I'll start up front by saying, I like being out on the trail, with all these people. It's fun, it's interesting. I mean, it's gonna sound really, really hokey, so forgive me, but it is historic. I mean, there's this very cool feeling about sort of being there, and you're watching history, whether it's Obama, whether it's with Clinton. I mean, even McCain, he'd be historic, right? He'd be the oldest guy ever elected president. But there is something. It would be historic. No, but there is something very cool about being there and being there and seeing history being made. The large crowds, tremendous energy, tremendous enthusiasm. It is encouraging. I mean, I've done this again for a real long time, so obviously I love it and I have a passion for it. What's been really fun about this campaign especially, and some of the credit goes to Obama, but I think some of the credit has to go to Clinton too, and the historic nature of her candidacy, which we tend to overlook, and which her campaign has not been pushing very much in that way. They decided, instead of talking about the historic nature of being the first woman, they sort of went with the experience card. All that said, what's been really exciting about this campaign is the degree to which people seem engaged in it. I have a couple daughters who are 13 and 17, and for the first time in their life, actually care about what I do. I come home, they ask about the campaign, they're interested. I was at an Obama rally we were in San Marcos, Texas, and at and I called home and I was talking to my 13-year-old and I said, "You want to listen to the rally for a little while?" So I put the phone down and I picked the phone up about a minute later. I said, "You still there?" She goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, you want to listen some more?" "Sure." I put the phone down, I picked it up about a minute later. I said, "You still there?" I said, I said, "I'm going to just put the phone down. I've got work to do. You just hang up whatever you want." So for 40 minutes, she sat there. I mean, a 13-year-old kid listening to a political rally, and and I picked up the phone. It's like, "Are you still there?" I went to lunch in LA. I ran out of the office and a place nearby, and in the 2 booths over, people were talking about Obama versus Clinton. This was the first few days before the California primary. I mean, people seem to have been energized and interested and captivated by this campaign nothing I can recall since, no pun intended, nothing I can recall since the California recall. It's the only thing that compares. It's the only thing that compares, but people are really, really into this presidential campaign, and to me, that's the most exciting thing. Yeah, right there on the aisle. That's a real good question. How much is dissatisfaction with Bush? I think that does play a big part in it, particularly, most especially on the part of Democrats. I cannot tell you how many people I've interviewed, and I've interviewed at this point scores, if not hundreds of people all around the country, and time again, I would talk to Obama supporters or Clinton supporters or Biden supporters or Dodd supporters, all of whom would say, I really like fill in the blank, but I'm fine with whoever, because I so want a Democrat back in the White House. So I think you're right. I think on the part of Democrats, I think there's a tremendous amount of energy and pent-up anger, frustration, going back, frankly, to 2000. So I think that counts for a large part of it. Yeah, with a cap on? Why is he hesitant to reject Farrakhan's support? I'm not sure I would agree with you. I think he did. I think there was that dance around at the debate about renounce, reject, denounce, and eventually he came around and did say that he both rejected and denounced. I think he originally denounced, and there was the distinction about denounce versus reject, and they went around and around on it, and then he ended up, this was the debate in Cleveland where he finally said, if it makes you happy, I both denounce and reject. Yeah, here in front. Yeah, that's really interesting. The question is about the increase in the global media, and one of the people I've met this year on the campaign trail is a fellow for the national newspaper, sort of like the New York Times of Italy. And we've become good friends, and he says they just cannot get enough, and I've seen him all over the campaign trail time and time again, and I talked to him about that, and we've done stories, the New York Times has done stories. There's an incredible, incredible international interest in this presidential election. I think a large part of it driven by Obama and the possibility of America electing a black president for the first time, but there's a tremendous amount of interest. And I've talked to my friend about this, and I've talked to other foreign reporters, and there is, just as Democrats are anxious to see President Bush leave, there are a lot of people around the world who are, shall we say, not fans of President Bush and the Bush administration. And so there's a tremendous amount of interest, huge interest in seeing him replaced. And actually, I found that McCain, I was talking to someone about this, actually McCain is seen very favorably in Europe. He's gone over there. They have this big conference, this big defense conference they have every year in Munich, and McCain has been going there for years and years and years, and he's very, very well known in European capitals. So from the conversations I've had, which, I'm not suggesting that they're, this is the policy of foreign governments, but from sort of the casual conversations I've had with foreign reporters, the feeling that they've gotten is that basically governments in Europe would be happy with anybody of the three running. They like Hillary, they like Obama, and they also like McCain. Yeah, all the way in the back, and then I'll come to you in the front. Yeah. The question is, will Democrats unify behind whoever ends up being the nominee? And I think at the end of the day, they will. I think that there are going to obviously be some people who won't, individuals who are ticked off. But I talked to someone in Iowa who was a huge, huge Obama supporter. And I'm trying to remember, this might have been on the eve of the caucuses, and things got very, very emotional. And things do get very emotional in campaigns. People are very committed. They work very, very long hours. They pour their hearts, they pour their souls into it. They get very, very invested in it. And this person said to me, I'm really angry, and I'm really disgusted, I'm really pissed off at the Clinton people. But if she wins, at the end of the day, I'll probably swallow hard and go to work for her because I want to see a Democrat in the White House. So I do think that most Democrats will come together, whoever the nominee is. Yeah, I said I'd come to you. The question is, all the emphasis on black woman. Why haven't we talked about age? McCain, as we said, McCain is 71. He will be 72 on. It's interesting. He will be 72 the day after the Democratic convention ends, 2 days before the Republican convention ends. And someone was asking, who's going to make a bigger deal of his 72nd birthday, the Democrats or the Republicans? I think it is an issue, and I think it will become an issue. I think it's an issue. I'm sorry, I think it will become more of an issue. I think people will talk about it. McCain has a history of medical problems. He has promised that he's going to release his medical records. He had skin cancer a few years back. I think it's going to be an issue. I think there hasn't been as much focus on it because, frankly, the main storyline, the main narrative people are focused on right now is the Clinton-Obama campaign. But I think eventually, when it does come down to a choice between the two, I think there is going to be more focus on McCain's age and the question, and woe unto him if he gets sick or if he trips or if he falls, anything like that. I mean, you guys laugh, but in 1996, Bob Dole, who was 73, oldest guy, he might have been the oldest guy ever to run for president, but Dole literally fell off a stage. I mean, he was losing anyway, but that let me tell you, that did not help. Yeah, with a cap. The question is the possibility of a Lieberman-McCain ticket or an Obama Clinton ticket or Clinton-Obama ticket. The Lieberman thing would be interesting. I know the two of them are very, very close. That would really be a mind blower. That would have to be a first. A guy who ran for vice president as a Democrat 8 years later, running for vice president as a Republican. I'm not sure. It kind of goes to, there's always the question when you are picking a vice president about how do you approach it? Do you try and win a state? In 1960, John Kennedy put Lyndon Johnson on the state specifically to win Texas, which he did. Bill Clinton in 1992 took a very, very different tack. He sort of went for the exponential growth thing. He put someone who was like him. That's my cell phone. I apologize, I didn't turn it off. In front. Bill Clinton took a different approach. He picked someone who was very much like him, a youthful Southerner, to sort of underscore that fact about himself. So there's different approaches. I suppose if John McCain wanted to underscore sort of this maverick, think outside the box, do things different image, then he would go with someone like McCain. He would go with someone like Lieberman. The prospects of a Clinton-Obama ticket, I think Obama put it really, really well. There's a big difference between an Obama-Clinton ticket and a Clinton-Obama ticket. And there is, I wouldn't rule it out. There is that strong impetus. We saw it in 2004. There was a very, very big push. People felt like John Edwards was the runner-up. He deserved to be on the ticket, and John Kerry got together with him. Now, that campaign was a lot shorter. There was a lot less hostility between the two camps. That said, you cannot underestimate the disdain, the disregard, which manifested itself later that Lyndon Johnson held for John F. Kennedy. He went on the ticket anyway. So, long way of saying I wouldn't rule it out. Yeah, right there in the middle. Question is one that is near and dear to my both my heart and my personal financial security, and that is the changes at the LA Times, which for those of you who have been following at home, we've gone through another round of downsizing. More people have taken the buyouts. I was just telling the professor before we started, when I started the LA Times, and I don't take responsibility for this, I think it's coincidence, but our staff was like 1,200 or so. Now we're down to about 850. So huge reduction in staff. To be honest with you, it can't help but make a difference. I have not seen it yet. I was just saying before I came up here, we were talking, I was saying I'm having the opposite problem. They keep encouraging me. They want me to go out more and go more places and do more stuff. And I'm the one who's saying I don't want to go to Wisconsin. I don't want to go to Wyoming. I think it will have an effect. We've lost a researcher. We're probably gonna go down a reporter or two. It's you're being asked to do more with less. That can't help but stretch things thinner. That said, I have been told, because I've asked, that we do have a commitment to covering this campaign, that we're going to continue to cover it aggressively. I think we had more than any other news organization. I think I would have to sit here and count, but I think we might have had like 16 reporters in Iowa, which was a ton of people. Are we going to send that many to the convention? I don't know. Like I said, you can't help but, when you're cutting people, you can't help but sort of reduce what you're putting out. But I think basically, the basic report is gonna be there, and the commitment is there. And personally, I'm gonna keep going until I go to the airline counter, give my American Express card, it balances. Then I'll take that as a sign that it's time to come home. Yeah. If Obama gets the nomination, what kind of scrutiny are Republicans going to bring against him? I think there will be campaigns that will be run on sort of two tracks. I think there will be, I think the main argument against Barack Obama will be the one that you've seen Hillary Clinton make. I think they'll talk about his lack of experience. I think they'll call into question his judgment and his preparedness. I think they'll talk about his record, suggesting that he is not as bipartisan as he may suggest. He is very, very liberal. I think all of that will be sort of the above-board stuff. I think whether it's aided and abetted by the Republican Party or not, I think its allies will be, there'll be a lot of whispering campaigns. There'll be questions about his patriotism, like whether he says the Pledge of Allegiance, whether he was, sworn into office with his hand on the Quran, whether he's sort of this Manchurian Muslim candidate. I think you'll hear the words BH or B Hussein Obama a lot. For those of you who don't know, that's his middle name, Barack Hussein Obama. I think you can hear a lot of that sort of stuff. I think there'll be a lot of whispering going on. So again, I think there'll be sort of the above board differentiation on issues, questions of experience, preparedness, and then I think there'll be sort of the nasty, ugly stuff about his background, about his ethnicity, all that kind of stuff. Hang on, you had a question I want to give someone who hasn't had one, yeah. What would be the lines of attack against Hillary Clinton? I think the lines of attack would be big government liberal, divisive figure, bringing back the years of Clinton scandal to the White House. I mean, in a way, a lot of it has sort of been out there, and we sort of saw it. I'm sure there'll be some other sort of creepy whispering stuff. They'll probably bring up the whole, they'll bring back. I mean, it'll be the Clinton years' greatest hits. It'll be Travelgate. It'll be Whitewater. It will be Monica Lewinsky. It'll be all the years of Clinton scandal dredged all back up, along with the idea that she's this, divisive person who probably, is temperamentally ill-suited to be commander-in-chief. That sort of stuff. Yeah. Actually, for me, the question is, a lot of people have a problem, quote unquote, with Hillary Clinton. What do I think that is? I think, boy, put me on the spot. Let me think about that. I think that there are a certain number of people who don't like women who can be very, very strong and assertive. I think there are people who find that off-putting. Whether it's gender stereotyping or not. I mean, she is. She can be a very assertive, blunt, sometimes acerbic, sometimes sarcastic person. And I think there are people who I mean, we're all grown-ups. I'll put it bluntly. It's the old thing about, a man who's like that is tough, and a woman who's like that is a bitch. And that's just the way it is. There are gender roles, there are gender stereotypes, and well, sorry, or not. But I think there is that gender, and I think that plays into certain gender stereotypes. And there are people who just don't like women who are strong and who are assertive. And I think that's what she labors under. And she is too a very, very partisan figure. I would not dismiss that. She's a very, very partisan figure. And I think that is another reason why Republicans don't like her. Do I think it's peculiarly American? Boy, that's, yeah, and the question is that peculiarly American? That's hard to say. I could wing it. The truth is, I've never lived overseas. I've never covered a foreign election. But you're right. Other countries, how many other countries around the world, from Israel to India to, in South America, on and on, have all elected women leaders? I mean, I don't know. You're the political science professor. You can probably answer that better than me. Is it a peculiarly American thing? He says somewhat yes. Yeah. Yeah. Why do people care about the sex lives of politicians? That's a real good question. Why do people care about the sex lives of politicians? Here's my experience, not as client 8, but having observed this for a long time. It's funny. I think that for the most part, and times have changed and views have evolved considerably. We've come a real long way from, just in my experience, from Gary Hart in 1988 to where we are today. Gary Hart in 1988. Gary Hart was the front runner for the presidential nomination. Had a reputation for being, shall we say, a man about town, a playboy, in the euphemism, and very foolishly, in one of the great stupid political tricks of all time, said to a New York Times reporter, who actually is going to be on campus, a guy named E.J. Dionne. He's going to come. He's coming to talk to IGS sometime this week, and if you have the chance, you should go see him. E.J. is a wonderful guy. Is it the J School tomorrow? Okay, here's a plug for E.J. He's a terrific reporter, really nice guy, really smart. very entertaining, far wittier and better than me, so go over and see him. But EJ was at the New York Times, I believe, at the time, and he had a New York Times Magazine article, and he asked Gary Hart about this. He said, got this reputation, Playboy man about to. Gary Hart says, go ahead, follow me around, you'll be bored. Well, the Miami Herald decided to do so, and they caught him with a woman who was not his wife, fooling around, into the Gary Hart campaign. Right there, huh? Oh, the name of the boat. Well, there's a famous book. They took a boat to Bimini, and the famous picture of Donna Rice sitting on his lap on the boat, The Monkey Business. Okay, so there was a question there somewhere. The question is, why do people care? I think each case is different. I think, in instances where we've had politicians accused of fooling around or doing whatever, I think that voters tend to forgive a guy, and they do tend to be men. If the wife, the spouse, says, hey, it's fine by me. We saw that. No, seriously, we saw that. We saw that with Arnold Schwarzenegger a few days before the recall. My newspaper published famously some allegations involving untoward behavior toward women. Maria showed up and said, hey, you know what? None of your business. So people are like, okay, fine. I think in Spitzer's case, I think it went beyond that. I think there was the whole issue of hypocrisy. I think there was the whole question of the steps he went to cover up what he was doing. And I do think, his image in particular as someone who had prosecuted these kinds of cases, as someone who had offered himself up as a symbol, as someone who was elected specifically promising to clean up government, to be a straight arrow, it so contravened his image and everything he stood for. I think that's why, in this instance, people did care, and why he made the decision that he had to step down and go, yeah. Well, I'm not sure what you mean about coverage being premature, or the question is, the question is the coverage too premature? I mean, my response to that would be, it's sort of like, it's what's going on right now. There's this incredibly intensive contest, which is still going on. It still is very much a struggle. It's still not very clear who's going to win this thing. So I think we're just, I think the coverage is fitting for what's going on at the time. And if there's any sort of empirical measure, I can tell you, anytime we put up a political story on the website, the traffic just goes through the roof. It's always, the 2 or 3 most read stories. You can't do it with the newspaper, but on the website every day are political stories. So I can tell you, and based on the response I get from readers, emails, that sort of stuff, there's a tremendous interest out there. Yes, in front. Question is, how much of an impact did things like Hillary's 3 a.m. ad? For those of you who don't recollect or didn't see it, it was an ad. Basically, it's 3 o'clock, the phone rings. Who's going to pick it up? It was basically a knockoff. There's very little. Politics is a lot like Hollywood. There's 1 or 2 ideas, and they've been done over and over and over and over. The red phone ad is an iteration of an ad that, actually, speaking of Gary Hart, the first time Gary Hart ran, pre-Monkey Business in 1984, he was sort of, for a time, the Barack Obama of his day. He was running against a guy named Walter Mondale, who was the vice president, sort of this boring, mashed potato, bland kind of guy. Gary Hart was new ideas, excitement. They ran an ad very similar. They ran it in Ohio, and this one featured a red phone. And there were no kids sleeping in bed, but it was just this ringing red phone, and the argument was the same. When the red phone rings in the White House, who do you want to answer it? Well, that killed Gary Hart. I think to answer your question, I think it did have an impact. I think it did raise doubts about Barack Obama. And the other interesting thing too is, for all the desire on the part of some in the party establishment, I can tell you the candidates, their staffs, a lot of us covering the campaign are all exhausted. For all the sentiment that that people would like this thing to be resolved in some fashion, one way or the other, the voters don't seem to want that. There was a there was an ABC Washington Post poll that ran the day before Ohio and Texas, and you'll remember Bill Clinton and others had said, if Hillary Clinton loses Ohio and Texas, it's over, she's done. 3/4, something like 60-some% of the people surveyed said, you know what, she should keep running even if she loses. So it's like the public, to go to your question about news coverage, the public isn't tired of this. They want this thing to keep going. And you'll note every time it looked like it might have been over, I think people in New Hampshire, a lot of them, in fact, I talked to some people, it's always dangerous to draw assumptions from anecdotes, but I had a couple conversations with people who said, you know what, I like Barack Obama, but I'm going to vote for Hillary because I don't want this to be over yet. So I think the ad hurt Barack Obama, but I think there are a lot of people who just want to keep this thing going who don't want it to be over yet.